My CEO climbed onto a cafeteria table, pointed at me, and fired me in front of the entire company. I handed him my keys, said good luck, and walked away, because he had no idea those keys controlled far more than locked doors. 48 hours later, a $200 million deal was gone, employees were locked out of the building, and the same man who humiliated me was desperately asking one question. Who exactly was Lauren Vale? The second Grant Mercer climbed onto the cafeteria table, I knew he wasn't here to lead. He was here to perform. He balanced on the plastic tabletop like a man about to unveil a revolutionary gadget. Except instead of a product launch, he jabbed a finger at me and announced, "Me, Lauren." Then louder for the whole room to hear, "You're done." Effective immediately. Coffee cups stopped halfway to mouth. Forks hovered midair. That thin, electric silence hit, the kind that shows up right before something expensive breaks. He just fired me in front of junior analysts, facility staff, and the vendor reps who happened to be touring that day. He was chewing on a protein bar like it was part of the speech, calling it cutting dead weight. I didn't argue. I didn't blink. I reached into my bag and pulled out the master key ring I'd carried for 11 years. The same ring that opened boiler rooms, network closets, loading bays, the emergency lockbox, and that one subbed organized. I held it up, calm as a bartender, sliding a drink across a counter to the customer who's about to regret ordering it. "Good luck," I said, and set it on the table. Grant smirked the way people smirk when they confuse cruelty for strength, like he'd just conquered inefficiency, like I was a glorified custodian who'd finally been as escorted off the estate. What he didn't know, what nobody in that cafeteria knew, was that those keys weren't just for doors. Some of them didn't open anything physical anymore. They authenticated systems, validated compliance roles, triggered vendor approvals, confirmed custody on filings. A few were tied to hardware tokens that acted like the final signature on everything that mattered. They weren't keys, they were the locks. Stay with me because the moment Grant won, the building started dying. He just hadn't felt the symptoms yet. Grant wasn't born into leadership. He was poured into it. You could smell inherited confidence under the expensive cologne. He didn't climb. He drifted in on a parachute stitched with family privilege. When the founder, his father, stepped back for what the board called personal clarity, they installed Grant as interim CEO, while everyone politely pretended it was a strategic decision and not a bloodline compromise. Grant immediately started restructuring. His version of restructuring looked like rearranging an org chart, the way a bored kid rearranges magnets on a fridge. He called the executive assistant babe in meetings. He referred to himself in third person. Grant doesn't micromanage, he told the DevOps team. Grant is a macro visionary. And then came what he called the cleanse. By 9:15 that morning, he'd fired Martin Ellison, the company historian, an older man who'd been here since the first round of funding, and whose job was basically to remember what everyone else kept forgetting. Martin cried quietly into his cardigan and packed up his office plants like he was leaving a funeral. Grant slashed the wellness stipend, then fired 2 remote staffers over video. He muted them halfway through their goodbyes and said, "We move fast now." He announced there would be no more cubicle walls because walls create complacency. "We are an open battlefield," he declared. But I wasn't an efficiency cut. I was a message. Grant needed a public scalp, someone whose name people recognized, someone associated with the old way. He needed to prove that the company had changed. So he took me out loudly, publicly, with maximum spectacle. I walked out without a scene, past the reception desk, past interns frozen in place, past the motivational poster I'd always wanted to set on fire. Collaboration builds champions. Straight to my car. I didn't drive home. I sat into the garage with the engine off, staring at my palm. Even without the ring on it, I could feel the weight of those keys. Not metal, memory, authority, leverage. In the glove box behind the insurance paperwork and the emergency flashlight was a blue binder I hadn't opened in years. Facilities and continuity protocols, custodian of record. 11 years earlier, the founder had handed me access that didn't come with a title. It came with liability. Back when we were operating out of a converted storage room, when the servers were a stack of bargain hardware and optimism, I was the one who stayed overnight during the ransomware scare. When the fire inspector threatened to shut down our basement racks, I was the one who negotiated a waiver and got the suppression system upgraded without bankrupting us. My name ended up everywhere it shouldn't, because it had to. Vendor portals, lease addendums, federal compliance filings, security custody, multi-factor administrative tokens. I wasn't flashy. That's why people forgot. But my name wasn't on the wall. It was in the bones. And now the company had a boy king who didn't know the difference between an access badge and a root certificate. He could play CEO. All I had to do was stop being the person who quietly prevented disasters from happening. My front door stuck like it always had, just slightly to the left. Years ago, the foundation settled wrong, and I never fixed it. I'd come to like the resistance, a small reminder that if you push on something hard enough, it pushes back. I kicked it open, dropped my bag near the cat's dish, and sat at my kitchen table with the stillness of someone who's been punched by nepotism wrapped in luxury fabric. Not crying, not raging, just quiet. That particular kind of quiet that arrives when you realize the thing you built day after day, year after year, was handed to someone who thinks compliance is a trendy app. Grant didn't just fire me. He cut out the nervous system and assumed the body would keep moving. I went to the hall closet and reached behind the extra blankets. Pulled out a black and blue binder that hadn't seen daylight since the last earthquake drill. Inside was everything Grant never thought to ask about. Override procedures, vendor lock codes, escalation trees. Call this person before you touch that copies of custody filings. Proof of authority. On page 1 in plain ink was a line that mattered more than my job title ever had. Lauren Vale named records custodian. People sign what they don't understand. They wave through what looks boring. Then they forget it exists. I never forgot. 5 years ago, the founder had slid a pen across his desk and said, "We need someone who understands both the wires and the rules. Someone with a spine." I signed that signature, put me on federal compliance records, infrastructure leases, and the administrative chain tied to the campus backbone. I became the fallback, the fail-safe. The person vendors called at 3 a.m. when an alarm wouldn't stop screaming. You don't fire a fail-safe in public. You transition her. You offboard her properly. You document it. You thank her. If you're smart, you beg her to consult. Grant wanted a headline. Now, I had 2 things he didn't: time and leverage. So, I started making calls. Quiet ones, professional ones. First was Priya at Summit Vault Hosting. She picked up on the second ring. "Lauren, what happened? Your email just bounced. I'm no longer authorized to approve maintenance-level overrides for the Tier 3 environment," I said evenly. "Please route future requests through your updated primary contact." Silence. "Lauren," she finally said, voice careful, "you're still listed as the primary custodian, not my circus anymore." Then I called Victor at Nexigrid Security, the vendor who ran our badge system and surveillance. He actually laughed when I told him I was out. That explains the dashboard errors. Grant's team tried to reboot the lock server. They froze the controller and then blamed our firmware. "I'm not available," I said. "Please document that." "Already did," he replied. "And Lauren, they don't even know they have facial token matching on half the doors." Each call was clean. No threats, no sabotage, just absence. The sudden deafening absence of thousands of assumed tasks that only existed because I did them without needing applause. That night, I poured a glass of cheap wine into a mason jar and swatched Stonehaven's internal chat implode through a burner login I'd never bothered to remove. Why is the vendor portal showing credential reissue pending? Does anyone know how badge provisioning works now? Lauren used to handle this. Who has the binder? What binder? I didn't touch a thing. I just let the machines behave the way machines behave when nobody knows what they're connected to. Grant thought he'd fired an employee with a keyring. What he'd actually done was remove the keystone and expect the arch to stay up out of respect. The first symptoms hit at 7:12 a.m. Grant walked up to the main entrance, swiped his badge, and the reader let out a long, disappointed beep. He swiped again. Beep harder. Beep. He pressed the badge to the reader like force could negotiate with access control. Nothing. Earl, one of the janitors who'd been there since the place still smelled like new carpet and startup panic, shrugged as he pushed his cart past. "Sometimes you got to jiggle it," Earl said. Or maybe talk to Lauren. Grant's face tightened. She doesn't work here anymore. Earl nodded slowly. Well, that explains it. By 8:30, half the company stood outside in business casual, clustering around locked doors like confused birds around a closed feeder. ID got pulled in. Samir Patel, head of IT, patient to a saintly degree, explained it on speakerphone. We can't provision new badge authorizations until the master override credentials are transferred. Grant snapped. Then transfer them. Samir paused, choosing words carefully. We can't. The root custodian is still Lauren Vale. She's the only one who can issue new admins without triggering federal audit flags. Grant barked. Work around it. Smear's voice stayed calm. She built it to resist workarounds. That's the point. In plain language, we're locked out. By noon, payroll hit a snag. Not because the money wasn't there, but because the routing system fell into a validation loop. Leonard Wu from finance came into Grant's office looking like he'd aged a decade since breakfast. The second-tier authorization token, Leonard said. It's dual verification. Lauren ran the second half through her hardware key. Grant waved him off. Order a new one. Leonard blinked. The issuing agency says our authorization expires the moment the custodian changes without a recorded transition. Guess who's listed as the renewal contact? Procurement followed. A shipment of critical server parts got denied because the vendor system flagged Stonehaven as compliance unresolved. Their rep emailed, primary compliance signatory no longer employed, no replacement on file. Please update to resume deliveries. Grant replied with, we don't need a compliant signatory anymore. New era, no greeting, no punctuation, pure ego. The vendor froze the account permanently. Then someone tried logging into the facility's management console and triggered a security hold. The backup HVAC system kicked in and set us an entire wing to 92 degrees. People started sweating through button-down shirts like they were being slow-cooked. In HR, someone said what everyone was thinking quietly, like saying it too loudly might make it worse. Did we fire the one person who knew how this place runs? Yes. Yes, they did. Across town, I sat at a diner with lukewarm coffee and eggs, watching the panic roll by in threads and screenshots. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like gravity. Later that week, I took a meeting I hadn't expected to take so soon. Meridian Crest's offices smelled like lemon polish and money. Glass walls, quiet carpet, an espresso machine that probably required a firmware update. I sat across from their COO, Camille Royce. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, handshake like she'd already won. She flipped through my resume like it was a formality and said, Stonehaven really let you go. Fired me in the cafeteria. I said, from a table. Camille's smile didn't reach her eyes. That's fascinating. We've been wondering for years how Stonehaven ran so smoothly with so much chaos around the edges. She leaned forward slightly. I think I'm looking at the reason. The interview took 8 minutes. I walked out with a consulting agreement, equity options, and a parking spot with my name on it. They didn't want a warm body. They wanted precision. Back at Stonehaven, Grant was spinning hard. Every failure was legacy rot. Every delay was growing pains. Every meltdown was proof we're transforming. At a rush town hall in the break room, he announced, we're entering a lean era. We're streamlining. No more dead weight. The future is agile. Then he fired Samir. Yes, Samir, the man who'd been keeping the firewall intact while junior developers clicked phishing emails offering free gift cards. Grant handed it to his old college friend Dylan Cross, who once triggered an office-wide lockdown trying to install game mods on a company laptop. The next morning, the firewall flagged a routine update as hostile and blocked internal DNS. For 5 hours, internal email was down. A vice president sent an emergency memo by fax like it was 1997. Vendors started requesting formal confirmation of leadership qualifications. Insurance asked for updated custodial documentation. Compliance portals pinged with warnings. HR hired outside counsel just to be safe. None of it was dramatic from the outside, but inside it was the corporate equivalent of organs failing one by one. Then came the meeting. Grant couldn't charm his way through. Compliance committee. He showed up late, phone in hand, sipping something green and expensive, and interrupted the general counsel mid-sentence. "Wait," he said, squinting at a document. "Who is Lauren Vale? Her name is everywhere." The GC, Michael Sterling, stared at him like Grant had asked what year it was. Grant shrugged. "She doesn't work here." Michael's voice stayed steady, but his eyes hardened. "She does on paper. She is still listed as custodian of record on our federal filings, our vendor certifications, and the compliance framework tied to our security audits." Grant frowned. "Then change it." Michael didn't blink. "It doesn't work like changing a username. It requires documented transition logs and verification. The timeline is strict, and HR did not process a compliant offboarding. HR tried to bag out a paperwork. The portal flagged it within minutes. Suspicious submission pending review. And just like that, the trap sprung. Not because I said it, but because it had always been there, waiting for someone reckless enough to ignore it. The real damage landed when Redbridge Systems, the $200 million partnership we'd been courting for months, Lequis updates cybersecurity custody credentials due diligence. Stonehaven's response bounced then stalled. Redbridge ran a credential audit. Every framework still pointed to one name, Lauren Vale. No replacement filed, no alternate custodian validated, no transition proof. Redbridge didn't call Grant. They called me. When their legal counsel asked if I could verify the current state of Stonehaven's systems, I answered with the truth. I was terminated without transition or compliant offboarding. I said, "I'm not affiliated. I can't verify anything on their behalf." 2 days later, Redbridge issued a polite, lethal email. "Until custodial status is clarified and re-certified, we are pausing all proceedings." Pause is the deadliest word in business. Grant, in a moment of insecurity, dressed up his confidence, mocked me at an all-hands, called me the queen of filing cabinets, said modern companies didn't need paper dinosaurs. Legal didn't laugh. Michael called an emergency board session. By then, the founder, Richard Hale, had returned from his sabbatical, pulled back by the smell of a deal dying. The boardroom was quiet, in the way rooms get quiet when people are adding up losses. Michael laid it out without theatrics. "You did not fire an employee," he told Grant. "You severed root custody, and you continued operating as if nothing changed." Grant tried to deflect. Blamed it. Blamed HR. Blamed legacy. Richard Hale's face didn't change, but his voice did lower heavier. "You're telling me," Richard said. "We removed the custodian of record and didn't properly replace her." "Yes," Michael replied. "And we attempted to falsify the transition timeline." Michael's pause was small, but it landed. "Yes." The next morning, Redbridge didn't just pause, they withdrew. No insults, no lawsuit, just a clean exit. "Due to internal realignment, we are discontinuing partnership discussions with Stonehaven Analytics." Effective immediately, Richard read it twice, then looked at his son. Grant started reaching for excuses like a drowning man reaching for smoke. She made it hard to replace her. She didn't leave instructions. She probably planned this. Michael cut in cold but controlled. She didn't do anything. She left. You ended the relationship. You didn't do the work that comes after. That was the moment Grant finally ran out of noise. Stonehaven didn't collapse in one dramatic explosion. It peeled apart quietly. Contract by contract. System by system. Across the street from Stonehaven's headquarters, a new sign went up at 8:01 a.m. on a frosted glass door. Vale Continuity Advisory Small Office. Clean furniture. No hype. Just work I could trust. 2 former clients funded it quietly. People tired of chaos being sold as innovation. People who didn't want buzzwords. They wanted stability. They wanted someone who knew where the true power lived in the boring, documented, verified parts of operations. Day 1 booked. Day 2 profitable. Day 3 whispered about. From my window, I watched Richard pacing outside Stonehaven's side entrance, phone clamped to his ear. Then I watched legal escort Grant down a hallway. Not dragged, not shoved, just guided the way you guide someone who's about to be told the building is no longer theirs. My phone buzzed. Allison from HR, Richard's back. Legal asking about lease authority and other buzz. Nathan from IT, they realized the campus lease addendum still lists you as transition authority in case of leadership disruption. Nobody updated it. Why didn't anyone know this? I didn't answer right away. 3 years ago, during an expansion, Richard had wanted speed. He needed someone to sign who could move and still keep it compliant. The clause was meant as protection. If leadership wobbled, custody stayed stable until reassignment. No one ever reassigned it. Grant never asked. He didn't read the documents that keep companies upright. He only read the ones that made him look important. Later that morning, I crossed the street, not sneaking, not strutting, just walking the way I used to walk when I belonged there. Reception looked up startled. Veil. I set a small ring into the tray. 2 items, physical master key. 1 old hardware token that had long since been rotated out but still carried symbolic weight. Returning what's left of this, I said. The receptionist swallowed. Should I tell them you're here? I glanced toward the closed boardroom door where the tension seemed to leak into the hallway like heat from an overloaded server. Tell them, I said and stepped back. I didn't wait for the reaction because the point was never revenge. The point was understanding. Grant had wanted a spectacle, and he got one, just not the kind he could clap for. He thought I was a background character with a keyring. He learned, too late, that the background is what holds the whole frame together. And as I walked back across the street to my own office, my own door, my own keys, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished, not with anger with that chapter. Stonehaven would either rebuild with humility, or it would keep bleeding out under the weight of someone who thought leaderships meant standing on tables and shouting. Either way, I'd already moved on quietly, legally, and completely. If you like the story, tell me in comment section and share the story with your well-wisher.